Welcome to the God's Goodness Podcast, where our mission is to encourage and highlight God's goodness and modern-day miracles. We are your hosts, Josh and Shelley Hankins. Today we have with us a special couple. They're back again. It's Pastor John and Belinda Kent with us, and they have started telling us about their tales of their mission work in Papua New Guinea. And we first started off with the calling, and then how they found their way 270 miles deep in the jungle. And now we're going to talk about some more miracles and stories. And years ago, I told Pastor John, you need to write a book. And this is the next best thing until he gets that book written for us. So with that, we'll have them open us up with an opening prayer.
Yeah, thanks for letting us be here. Let's pray. Father, we are just so grateful for your grace in our lives, and so astounded that from across the scope of the universe, you looked down and saw us and saw value in us all and have chosen to use us for your glory. And so we just come to this moment, this time of sharing, and ask you to guide in everything that's said today, Lord, that it truly will bring glory and honor to you. Thank you for hearing this prayer. Amen.
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 Okay, so where are you starting it today?
Well, we thought what we would do is kind of pick up where we left off. Last time, if you remember, I told the story of arriving and discovering, or wondering where I'm going to build a hut among the Iwan people. And they took me to the top of a hill, and there in the middle of nowhere, 270 miles from the nearest town, is a 17 by 25 foot house on little iron posts, and a medical center separate from the house that the government had built several years earlier but had no money to staff. And so when I returned back to the provincial center of Wewak, I thought, the villagers had said, you can just use this. And I thought, well, it would be wise to check in with the government just to be sure. And so when I got back and recovered from sunburn and mosquito bites, I eventually made my way to the provincial headquarters to see the Secretary for Health. And so I told him, listen, my name's John Kent. We're going to be moving to May River, and we're going to be establishing a mission there. And we found this house and health center sitting. And I'm just wondering, would it be okay for us to use that until we're able to, build our own home? And, Dr. Saireri was his name. He looked at me and he said, John, the truth is that we built that house and that little health center 4 years ago in the first attempt to bring development to the Iwan people. And the problem is we had a grant to build it, but we have no money to operate it. And so he said, if you will operate the health center, we'll give both the health center and the house to your mission to operate. So just like that, we not only had a house to live in, but we had a health center to operate, and just provided completely free by the provincial government.
What did you have to do to operate the health center? Was it vaccines? Was it, first aid Band-Aids? Was it like what was the minimum requirement to operate it?
They actually didn't give us a minimal requirement, but basically providing basic health care, first aid, treatment for malaria, tropical ulcers. There's a host of diseases, accidents that would happen. Belinda and I didn't come with any medical experience, really.
But we had just providentially, a student missionary had come for a year that wanted to join us. She was a nurse.
Oh.
So she was on her way to join us.
She was on her way to join us when the health center was given to us.
And clearly God was blindsided by that coincidence.
Yeah, and then just real quick add in, our church had a hospital in the Highlands that also was the training for nurses. And so eventually it worked out to where they would do a rotation. They would bring down 2 of their nurses every month that would stay a month with us. And then they'd come back and the doctor would visit for a day with the plane, and then they take nurses back and bring 2 new ones. So that was for a couple of years. We had a rotation of 2 nurses plus our student nurse.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
amazing provision of God.
Again.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things, this is where the story gets fun. So when the government had built this house, they actually put in a little septic system. And you think, well, where'd the water come from? Well, there we collected rainwater. We got 20 feet of rain a year, so we collected rainwater into tanks and then used that water, for washing. And this had a little tiny toilet, a little tiny shower in that house. But the problem was, they left the top of it was a fiberglass septic tank, and they left the top of it exposed. And so the tribal people came along and saw that and thought, that's a great place to build a fire. And so they melted down the fiberglass septic tank. And so that's what I found when I went up on the hill that day. And so what I needed to do now was to build a septic tank before I could move the family out, And so this all transpires not over in moments, but in days and weeks. It takes, the wheels move very slowly in that primitive situation. But finally I was able to find a friend, a member of our church there in Papua New Guinea in the Wewak, the provincial headquarters, another Christian Sabbath keeper, that he came with me, and we took up a bunch of supplies. And what can I say? So where our station was miles from the nearest gravel, right? And I knew I wanted to pour a concrete septic tank. So I took some supplies up to do that, but I went to an actual supplier there in that provincial headquarters, and I bought 35 sacks of pre-mixed concrete, with the gravel in it, not just cement, but concrete, that all you had to do was put water in. Mm-hmm. And so each one of those weighed 110 pounds. And so we went out to the river, we took 2 big canoes, I built a platform across them, and then I put onto that platform over 3,500 pounds of sacks of cement, and then tank rings and supplies, just all kinds of stuff, to try and get this house ready for the family to come out. And I'll never forget, we got into those canoes, got everything loaded. And by the way, between Wewak and the river is a 90-mile mud road, John, just amazing.
You don't want to forget anything.
Yeah, you don't forget anything, right? And, you come to raging rivers because it's rain, and you got to wait hours, and you're slogging through the mud. I'll get you some pictures on that, grinding through mud, trying to get there. Well, anyway, we get there, loaded up, and then begin what becomes a 2-day upriver journey. And along the way, man, just these monstrous crocodiles we're seeing. And we arrive at May River on September 16. I'll never forget that date. As we come to the station, the place where we're going to live, we pull in at the base of that hill. And I expected that there would be a whole bunch of men that would come to assist. But there was not a man anywhere. It just so happened that September 16 was Papua New Guinea's Independence Day.
Their own holiday. And
the entire tribe, which normally, they don't really, they don't have a way of celebrating, but all the men, everybody traveled several hours upriver to where they were going to play games for 2 days.
2 days.
And so when I pulled in there that evening with 3,500 pounds plus of cement and tons of other supplies, lumber and tank rings and all kinds of stuff, there was not a man bigger than 8 anywhere.
Oh my.
And so this friend of mine and I, and several guys that came with us, I hired these guys to guide us up the river and get all that stuff there. We lifted it all, got it all up in the bank, scrambling up this mud bank. And we went up and collapsed inside that little house. And the next morning, I get up, and the 3 or 4 guys that had come with me, they went down the hill, got in the canoes, and they went back down river. Because they said, we're part of a tournament for Independence Day.
You got stuff to do.
So they turned around and went downriver and left Sam and I, this was my friend, they left Sam and I standing on the bank.
And no one had mentioned, out of politeness, that it was Independence Day. Hey, you're going up there Independence Day. But, they were too embarrassed to say anything.
Also, did they keep calendars? How did they know that it was Independence Day? Was it literally just word of mouth? Or did they, watch the stars?
They had a basic calendar. They knew what date.
Yeah.
They knew. They were educated enough to know the dates and the calendars.
Right.
So...
So anyway, so we're standing there with this massive mound of supplies and a steep hill, quarter, third of a mile up to the house.
Oh, gosh.
And I looked at that pile and I looked at my friend Sam and said, well, we better start carrying. And so reach down and pick up a 110-pound sack of cement and put it on your shoulder and start hiking up that hill. And by the time you got up once, our legs were like jelly, right? Mm-hmm. And then come down and pick up another one and start up that hill again. And about the third round, these three little boys came out of the jungle. Ben, Jacob, and I don't remember the name of the third, but Jacob, Benjamin, and a third little boy. And they looked at us for a little bit, and then they ran off and disappeared. A few minutes later, they came back with an old iron-wheeled wheelbarrow. How long it had been there, where it had come from, I don't know, but it was this old iron-wheeled wheelbarrow. And they came back. And those three little boys, they would reach down and they picked up together a 110-pound sack of cement. And then one took one handle, one took the other handle, and the third tied a vine to the front of the wheelbarrow. And they would wheel up a sack of cement.
Wow.
And they helped us all day long as we carried cement up that hill and lumber up that hill and, other things that we, had to carry up. We probably had, 4,000 pounds of supplies on those two canoes. And it's an amazing memory. And I have a picture of them that I can share with you on that day. But here's the astounding thing. Through the years, we continued to invest in those boys. And Belinda, she taught Jacob how to read and write in Tokpizin, the local language, and then how to read and write in English. And eventually...
And I gave him basic math skills and stuff. He had a little bit of education. All the education in New Guinea is in English. So he'd had a little bit. So then I worked with him to up his math skills so that we could put him into mission school at grade 6. So
we put him into mission school at grade 6, and he went through that. And then we found some sponsors, and we helped him go on. Only 6 grades of education are expected in New Guinea. After that, you just get weeded out the farther you go. But eventually, Jacob completed high school. And today...
And then he went to pastor training.
He went to a little Bible school and did some pastor's training. And today, Jacob leads more than 1,000 believers.
Amazing.
That's going to make me cry.
Where's he stationed?
In that
At
same,
May River.
That May River.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
He's the leader of the church there at May River among the Iwam that previously had been unreached. And so he's leading more than 1,000 members today, with multiple churches and schools and the clinic and other aspects of that. So it's just an amazing story of God's grace of an 8-year-old boy coming with an iron-wheeled wheelbarrow.
What I love about that is those boys could have seen you struggle and brought you the wheelbarrow to make your struggle easier. But instead, they chose to join you and create work for themselves, right? Which took work from you, right? I love the heart behind that. I love the heart that says, hey, I want to help, so here's this. Instead, they said, I want to help, so I'm going to help. Instead of enabling you to do it easier, right? And I think you clearly saw it, that the willingness to step in and do something is probably what helped key your decision to invest in them. Is not just that they had a wheelbarrow, but that they used it to help you instead of giving it to you to help make yourself easier. Like I think this is something that is unidentifiable as what a leader is at a young age. Like, this is what you do.
Yeah.
And now here he is leading.
Yeah, and actually Jacob was Ben Malio that John met at the river that was such a providence. Jacob was his little brother.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
That story.
Jacob was Ben's little brother. But yeah, so, Jacob through the years, we returned, he completed his Bible school training, he came back to the village. He became a missionary among another tribal group nearby. Back in 2007, was it? Belinda and I returned, I can't remember the year, we returned to pay a final visit to the Iwam. And he was living deep, 8 more hours deeper into the jungle. And we went to find and visit him. He didn't know we were coming. But
You can't really call ahead.
Yeah, you can't call ahead.
On the jungle.
But, we made our way through the jungle over the coconut hills and, crossing rivers and wading streams. And when we come into the region, the word began to travel, up through the jungle, the coconut telegraph, we used to call it. The word made its way, and we met Jacob. He came across the river just weeping and weeping and weeping because his spiritual father and mother had come back.
Yeah, he just hung on to us just the longest time, just crying and crying. And we have a picture of that too, I think.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, just, it's just amazing what God did in that young man's life and what he continues to do with his life today.
Awesome.
All because of your faithfulness. That if it wasn't for the two of you going there, that never would have happened.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't have gone without her. And you had to go with kids. And so there was a great amount of faithfulness that took place on your part to enable him to lead with his faith.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So we're going to transition to Belinda here in a moment, but it took from the time that actually we arrived in the country until we made the move to May River was about 3 or 4 months. We arrived in July, I think July 9, and it was in late October-ish, right?
November,
when we actually made the move out there. Because just logistically, how do you move your family up there?
With no moving trucks.
With no moving trucks. Yeah, and we were able to get a truck. There's just a lot of trial, a lot of tears during that time, coming short of money, not having the money to do what we need to do. We made arrangements. There was this medical launch that was like a houseboat that we were supposed to be able to use to move our stuff out. And we were getting everything loaded on our truck, and then got word that launch didn't actually work. And so we were going to have to do it on canoes and yeah, so it just took a long time. But when it came down to the end, I left, was supposed to be just a few days ahead of Belinda. I was taking the load of our things out in these double canoes. And there were just a number of things that went wrong. many, many things that went wrong. And I was supposed to be there like a week ahead of her to finish up the septic system, to, just get the house, this tiny house, ready for she and the 3 boys. And I got there the night before they were supposed to arrive. And we had made arrangements for a pilot to come. We found there was an airstrip about 4 or 5 miles upriver that planes came into, and little 6-seater airplanes, a little grass airstrip. And we made arrangements for them to come pick Belinda up and take her out there, and I was going to meet them at that time. And with that, I'll transition over to Belinda.
So John left a week before, and of course there was no radio contact, no cell phones back then, nothing like that. So the kids and I, the 3 boys and I, were there in Wewak by ourselves, and I was trying to wrap up the final things before the pilots came. Our church had from the Highlands, they had several pilots that flew and serviced all the missionaries in New Guinea. So they were supposed to come pick us up in a week. And we had made arrangements when all the trips John had made to the government office and everything. The government was actually supposed to, every 2 weeks, they said they were flying out mail to the little airstrips up there in the area and to bring mail and supplies to everybody. And so we had arranged with them that our mail was coming to Wewak, and then they would pick it up. Someone from the mission in Wewak would take it to the government office, and then they would fly it out every 2 weeks. And so I thought, well, 2 weeks, I can handle going 2 weeks at a time without mail. So one of the last days there, I had one of the local people watch the boys, and I got on a bus and went to the government office, and it was actually one of our church members that was working for the government, and I went to talk to her just to make sure that she knew that someone from the Wewak mission was going to bring our mail, and they'd fly it out. And she looked at me and she says, well, unfortunately, the services have been suspended indefinitely. And I just looked at her. She says, we just don't have the money. They had planned on this big mine opening, and it hadn't opened up, and that was supposed to give all this money to the government, and it didn't work out, and they just didn't have the cash to do it. So I went back to our little house at the mission station where we were staying. It was right on the ocean where you could overlook the ocean. And I just said, God, what am I supposed to do? No mail. And the pilots flew in that evening, 2 of them. We called it the transit flat. There were several bedrooms, so they stayed in one of the bedrooms. And at that point, too, there was a radio system that everybody, all the missionaries in our church throughout New Guinea could get on the radio and, talk every day if you needed help or anything. And so they brought our radio, but they mentioned, oh, we forgot the battery. We accidentally left the battery to run this radio for communication. So that night they went down to the ocean and they went swimming, and then they came back. I'd gotten the boys to bed, and I just kind of sat at the table in the little transit house. I could hear the waves of the ocean. And I wrote a letter to my mom and dad, and I wrote a letter to John's mom, and I just said, I'm leaving tomorrow for the jungle. We don't know when we're going to get mail out again. The mail was suspended, And I just wrote, I don't know when you'll hear from us again. And I just sat there, I'd been struggling all day, close to tears. And I just sat there. Felt like I was writing my last will and testimony, I didn't know, and I just kind of just sat there, and I just let the peace. At first I said, God, I can't do this. I can't do this. And then I just let the peace of the waves, just the sound of the waves coming in, it just felt like God's peace was ascending on me, and that he said, you can, I will be with you. And so the next day, the pilots said, well, we're going to get up at 6 because they had a ton of other flying to do. We were the first on their list, and we'll drop you off. Well, no one at that point, they'd never flown into May River. And so...
And by the way, just so you know, flying there at that time was not, there weren't any electronics to do it. You did it with a watch, time, and landmarks.
Wow.
That's how you found an airstrip.
Anyway, so no one realized that May River often clouds in early in the morning, and that if you want to fly into May River, you kind of wait till 9, 10 in the morning. Well, we left at 6, and it was going to take an hour out there. We had gotten a dog for the boys, and so we went out to the Wewak airport in a little Cessna airplane. I'd never been on a little plane before. So we got in the back, and Aaron and Chad, the 5 and 3-year-old, were in the way back, and then I was in the middle seat holding our 18-month-old on my lap. The dog was down in the bottom in the baggage. They stuffed him in the baggage thing, and we took off. And I was scared to death, as the plane, a little Cessna plane. I'd never been on one, so I was scared to death, holding on to my little baby and then watching my boys. And as we flew out for the hour, I just was looking out the window and just noticed how remote. It was getting fewer and fewer huts. You could see the Septic River, but just fewer and fewer huts along. And I just said, really, this is really remote. I mean, John had kind of told me he'd had 2 trips up there, but still, it was just very remote. And then as we got closer to May River, where there's a few more hills, the clouds came in. And of course, they're not flying by instruments, they're flying by sight. And they never landed at May River before. So they were making their way through the clouds and circling around and around. And I said to them, how are we going to let John know that we're coming? I mean, we'd set on this date, but they said, oh, he'll know. He'll hear us. So we circled around and around, and the airstrip had white cones. There was actually another mission that was there at the airstrip. They were doing Bible translation, so there was one house there with a couple of American families. Anyway, they had the white cones out, and you could see them, and then the clouds would take over. And I think the pilots, later we found out that one pilot became our close friend, and he said he was pretty worried that day. Anyway, they made their way through the clouds, and I just kept hanging on to Matthew in my lap. And we landed on the airstrip, and, John, there was no way to let John know when to come. And so
I had gone to bed the evening before, absolutely exhausted from a several-day journey up the river in the sun and unloading stuff that night. And we had collapsed there and gone to bed. And so I woke up to a plane going around and around and around. And I said, well, that must be that. So we raced down, jumped into a canoe, and, made the way about 5 miles upriver. So, the pilots...
Yeah, they landed. So they landed. They left me there. They unloaded they had a ton of work to do that day. So they left the kids and I out, and the dog was just shivering. They opened the baggage thing. The dog was shivering. They took out the few bags that we had, and they shook my hands, and they said we had to take off. Now, the New Tribes translators that were there, they did come out and gave us a little shady place to sit while we were waiting for John. But just watching those pilots take off, it was like, you're just leaving me here in the middle of the jungle. Anyway, about 20 minutes later, John came up, and we got in the canoe and went downriver to where we were. And when we climbed out of the canoe there at the bottom of the hill, it was the canoe that had brought John up, and they had to take off immediately that day too to go downriver. So we stood on the riverbank. We had ordered a boat from Australia, a dinghy to take us around, and it had not arrived before we left. It was supposed to go up in the cargo that John had brought. So he had bought an outboard motor. So we stood there on the bank of that river watching these guys take off to go back to Mbunti with the canoes, and we had an outboard motor and no boat, and we had a radio and no battery. And I stood there on that bank with my 18-month-old in my arm and my 5- and 3-year-old boy standing beside me, was seeing all these people, in Wewak, a lot of people spoke English, but here they didn't speak English, just hearing the strange language. And a lot of them were covered with the skin fungus ringworm, and just saying, man, I hope none of them hold my baby, and just being scared to death. And then it felt like literally we were at the end of the world, just when those canoes, I'll never forget those canoes leaving us and going downriver, and just feeling like we were left in civilization, then walking up the hill in the heat and humidity, with the 2 little boys, and holding Matthew in my arms, and just making our way up to this tiny house. And the septic hadn't gotten done because John had just gotten there. And so we had this broken little outhouse to use for a few days. Anyway, the pilot actually came a week later and dropped the battery at the airstrip. Again, we just heard the plane circling.
Yeah, all we heard was a plane flying overhead.
and then knew that so John made his way upriver, and sure enough, he dropped the battery off. And so then we at least had communication. But yeah, it was quite scary. And so that was November. And then 3 weeks later, they brought our student nurse out, Kelly. And then when we had come to New Guinea, and when we had packed up all our crate and stuff in July from the States, I'd said to John, we should pack Christmas presents for our kids. We always made a big deal of Christmas for the boys, and we always bought quality things like Legos and stuff. And John says, they're going to have all that stuff over there. We can just buy it. And so we got to Wewak. When we got to Wewak in July, and when we were getting ready to move, I went, and all there were these little Chinese shops. Because John said back then, Australia, they're under Australia. They're going to have all the Australian goods. Well, they didn't. It was Chinese junky. I mean, not junky, but just little cheap Chinese stuff. And I was used to buying quality toys, for our kids. And so I'd written to our friends and family in the States and said, can you guys send a few little gifts for Christmas? Well, at that time, we did not realize that packages, not airmail, but packages took 6 to 8 months to get to New Guinea.
Wow.
So that's to get to the country.
To the country.
Then not let alone to us.
270 miles upstream.
Yeah.
Which only happened, I went to town about every 2 to 3 months. So from then on, we got mail every 2 to 3 months, packages every 2 to 3 months.
Anyway, so when we left Wewak, I didn't have anything for the kids, so we were up there, and it was getting closer to Christmas, and I just said to John, what are we going to do with the kids? What are we going to do with the kids for Christmas? Because we'd always make Christmas really special for them. And I didn't have anything for them. I bought a couple little things for them. So the couple days before Christmas, our radio, which we had working at that time, the pilot up in the Highlands, one of the other pilots crackled to life and said, how would you guys like to come to the Highlands for Christmas? He said, I'll come down Christmas Eve and pick you up. Yeah, Christmas Eve day. And so the day before, I just said to John, we got to get a couple little things made for the kids. So John actually went down. He'd gotten the generator shed set up in the generator, and he went down there and he bits of our crate. He took boards, and our oldest son, Aaron, he was 5.5 at the time, and he just said, we got to make something for my brothers. So he and John were there late at night making little boats out of the crate pieces. And that morning we had a little Christmas there for the boys. And then the plane came that day and picked us up and took us up to the Highlands. Now, unbeknownst to me, one of my friends in Michigan that was supporting us, she had decided she was going to airmail a Christmas package to us, not surface, but airmail. And so on the way, the pilot picked us up, and on the way, he was going to take us to our hospital at 8,000 feet there in New Guinea, which was going to be cool. It was going to feel more like Christmas because where we were was so hot. Anyways, on the way up to drop us at the Sopus Hospital, he got a radio call from his wife in Mount Hagen that a package had arrived from America for us. So he dropped us at Sopus. He didn't have to do this, and he flew 30 minutes over the mountain to pick up the package from his wife, flew back over to the hospital. It was this big box from my friend in the States. And the next morning was Christmas morning, and we opened it, and there was a toy for every kid. It was just, and little gifts and stuff, and it was just amazing. It was the best Christmas we've ever had.
Right on time.
Right on time.
And was it cooler? Did it feel nicer?
We needed jackets, and they're vegetables. They grew up there down in the plains. It was they can't grow food because the flooding and the river. We had bananas, but a few greens, but everything was hard up there. You went to the market. They had carrots and potatoes and broccoli, and you felt like.
Every time we went to the Highlands, it was like we died and went to heaven.
They even had strawberries, and it was amazing. So, and then we got to know some Australians. Another family was up there of Australians. They also had, we only had 3 children at the time, but they had 4 kids. And so they've become one of our best friends to this day. So we went on vacations with them. But yeah, we stayed up there with them. It was so nice and cool. And
it's a blessing.
That's incredible. I can't imagine the fear that you must have felt and how much God had to intervene on that fear to give you the peace enough to get on that plane. Mm-hmm. And then the fear you felt on the plane, the poor dog. And,
yeah, I know. I don't think he ever recovered from that.
And to bring a dog in, wouldn't the Iwan people see that as potential food at some point?
They usually didn't eat dogs, but maybe.
Well, I know some tribes actually still ate people, didn't they?
Well, many of the people that we lived among, many of the men still remembered the taste of human flesh.
Yeah, wow. So I don't know how a dog is off limits if Ray is not off limits. And so, the fear that you must have felt and the heat and the desperation and that's a lot to overcome. And to be a mother on top of it, not just a mother, but to bring those children with you as a mother, right? So you have the sense of protection as a mother, the sense of nurturing as a mother, and you have these 3 kids in a place where you admitted you can't provide Christmas. What else did you feel that you couldn't provide? And I can't imagine the amount of fear, trepidation, uncertainty that you could have felt. How much do you think you've grown from the first year to the second year to the third year? Or was it all pretty much asking God to give you peace every moment of every day?
No, it was actually, we grew to just love the people there and everything. And by the time we left, they actually said to us, John and Belinda, the only difference between us is your skin color. You're just like us. And it was a lot harder to leave than it was to go there. When we came back to States 8 years later, it was so hard. We just really missed them. So yeah, God did a lot of growth in us during that time.
And how hard was it for your kids to assimilate with American kids afterwards, after being a part of
our oldest
tribal life?
Was 13 when we brought him back, and it took him a decade at least to get over that. And it was harder. The others were a bit younger. Our daughter was only 6, so it wasn't as hard. But the first 2 years we were back in the States, there wasn't a day that went by that the kids or one of us said, life here stinks.
What an interesting perspective. And we have all these things that we take for granted, and your kids were raised with none of those things and longed for them.
Yeah, they were raised so simple because, their entertainment was making coconut fronds as a slide down the mud bank. And then in the river, we went down to river every night to swim. And just, they're Legos. They, eventually 2 years in, a family joined us. They were both nurses. So they joined us and they had a couple kids. So the kids together, would play together. And then when they came to the States, they just said, these kids just don't know how to entertain themselves. They just want video games. And, our kids were happy under our house. Eventually we built a house on 8-foot posts. And so every day in the heat, the kids would go under the house and play and make their cars and their tracks. And when they got to States, they said, kids don't know how to entertain themselves.
They don't know how to suffer either. Kids here, if it's a hot day, what do? They whine. They want to go inside. They don't want to do anything. They complain. What'd your kids do? Let's go slide down a mud bank.
Yeah.
It's hot. Nothing's going to change yet. Let's go have fun.
Yeah. So.
8 years, then we have another story maybe to tell to finish this piece up. But, 8 years of immersion in a culture like that irrevocably changes you. That culture was a highly relational culture. Houses, there aren't windows or doors even.
Windows with a screen.
Well, our house had windows and a screen, but theirs didn't. They were huts, and you're a village. And so you hear everything. You're part of everything that's happening in the village, so you're kind of immersed in it. And over time that becomes very comforting, maybe, reassuring just to know that you're part of this greater community. When you come here, when we came back, all of a sudden we went from this open environment into an environment with sealed houses and sealed doors, and you can't even hear the birds outside if your windows are closed, right? And you certainly have little engagement with your neighbors. So all of that was part of called reverse culture shock of coming back and just experiencing, after 8 years of immersion, having to re-enter this world and make adjustments back.
But on the front end, the lack of privacy on the front end was just really hard for me. We had this little 400 square foot house. The whole front end was open, and it was a porch, and John eventually put a screen on it so that the boys, it just gave an extra area for the boys to play in and not have to worry about mosquitoes. But it was right on the path to the health center. So every morning, and it was just open, my kitchen sink. And when I was cooking and stuff and doing my little laundry, we got a generator. So we had this little Japanese washer. We ran the generator a couple times a week anyway. So I would be washing the breakfast dishes, and I had started homeschooling our oldest son, sitting there at the table, and all the ladies with the children on their backs would come, and they would just plaster themselves on the screen, just looking at me and talking in their dialect, their local dialect. And the only place I had to go where they couldn't see me was our tiny bathroom, 2 feet by 2 feet. It had a tiny shower and a toilet. I would just go in there and just sit on the toilet and close the door just to get away from all these prying eyes. But, we got used to that more eventually.
The bathroom feels like my what do they call it? The war room.
Your war room?
Or my prayer closet, for sure. I get my best ideas in the bathroom.
Yeah. Anyway, so it just took a while to get used to that. But then when we came back to States, it was reverse of that.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess for the Yuan people, the concept of personal...
They didn't have it.
Like, not property themselves. I'm sure they knew it. If it's theirs, they know it's theirs. But as far as territory goes, was not a concept. Mm-hmm. And so they walked where they pleased.
Right.
Where are you? Wherever my foot is mine. It's yours too. It's fine.
Even property was everybody. If you didn't own it. You know, if somebody had something, somebody else could just come and take it and not steal it, but then it would become theirs. You know,
It's very shared community.
very
It
shared.
reminds me of the book of Acts, where if somebody needed something, the community pitched in and worked it out. They had what they needed.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Well, we wanted to, maybe for the next piece here, share Ben's story.
I love all these stories, and I want to let the listeners know some of our newest developments are an email list with the sign-up link is on the Facebook page. So the sign-up list will get you a weekly email, and it comes with a link to each episode, the newest episode, and there's also bonus content. So not only will you have access to a link each week, but also bonus content that you can sign up for. And it's free. So there's a saying, if it's free, it's for me. So it's really easy to sign up. If you know your name and email, you will be good and it'll be super easy. So sign up for that. And don't forget, we have a fundraising campaign on givesendgo.com. You look up God's Goodness Podcast and you can give there. And that helps with our audio expenses. And if you don't feel comfortable giving there, you can reach out to me and there's other ways you can give. And with that, we'll talk to you next time.